as I try to speak over the top of the sound of the testing of the Battlestar Galactica dueling roller coaster. Welcome back to another video feature, Immersive World's Handbook. Today I am at Universal Studios Singapore, and specifically I'm touring, as you might be able to see here from this relic, the Egyptian area, the Egyptian theme land of the park. And I wanted to use this opportunity to focus on Egyptian theming and specifically look at its growth and look at its decline. I mentioned in another segment here that's coming up about the fact that when I was in San Francisco, my flight over to Singapore, they just happened to have, good timing, and a small exhibition in the airport, as they often feature at SFO, on the growth of Egyptomania, the growth of Egyptian theming as part of American consciousness. And you could say that as a theme, it's maybe worldwide the most famous. You could think of King Tut. You could think of all the movie references and all of the mythology that has been created around Egypt through theming and through furniture and all sorts of other design elements. And I certainly could think of my colleague, Filippo Carla, who has done a lot of extensive study on how the ancient world of various cultures, including Egypt, gets themed in various ways. And in fact, on our trip, together with Florian Freitag, another theme park researcher, to Universal Studios Hollywood, we had gone to the Mummy ride, and we were hoping that the theming would be quite extensive there, and basically it was just one ride. I was pleased to see, as I'll show you in this feature, that the theming is quite extensive and it can be seen throughout this entire theme land that also has a mummy ride that I plan to visit and get a sense of it, how it compares to the same ride that I had a chance to ride at Universal Studios in Hollywood. So I'm looking here at the very iconic and in Egyptian theming ubiquitous hieroglyphs that you can see. And actually, interestingly enough, on my way over my flight through San Francisco, so we look at some more of the theming here, there was an exhibition going that was talking about the growth of Egyptian theming. They didn't actually call it theming, but basically what we would today call theming in theme parks and casinos and all sorts of themed and immersive spaces. They were talking about how this developed over the 20th century in the United States, and they showed everything from intricate furniture and lamps and bookcases and all sorts of emblems and medallions and other things that you could imagine, and talked about how this grew in our imagination. And they also referenced the term Egyptomania, which you know is quite famous for this idea, or it's a concept. It's not famous as a concept, I guess it is, but the idea itself is how Egyptian culture becomes part of fame, becomes part of our consciousness, and you can certainly see that reflected in so many spaces. In the Luxor at Las Vegas, in a sense, we see the dying of this theme, and I think it's too bad, and so perhaps it's spaces like this that are the ones that are left to preserve the so-called Egyptomania, if I can speak today, in our consciousness. And continuing my study of the Egyptomania here at Universal Studios, I am meeting at the Oasis Cafe food court, which I think I showed you some images earlier, but I'm having actually Indian food. Not that you wouldn't expect Indian food in Egypt, but again, this is probably a referencing of local populations and culinary interests. So yeah, they've certainly done a lot in this theme land, as you've maybe seen from some of my other footage. As I look at some more of the Egyptian theming, and let me take you down here to give you a look. Very, 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 very cool, I would say. Yeah. Impressive, to say the least. That may be the entrance to the mummy ride. I'll have to see. But one of the things I was thinking about, and in terms of the significance of Egyptian theming, I was at a TIA Themed Entertainment Association conference years ago, and at that conference, some designers were talking about the fact that they were creating a new luxury resort in Luxor, Egypt. And actually, interestingly enough, one of the things they talked about was the fact that they had to reference, or at least think about, the Luxor in Las Vegas, because of course it is etched in the consciousness of all. So what I might say is we have 3 levels of theming, of Egyptian theming that is in our consciousness, I think regardless of where we live, regardless where we're from. The first level is what I was referring to earlier in terms of the Egyptomania, which is how Egypt becomes part of our consciousness through all sorts of media forums, through explorer texts, through popular accounts, through King Tut, movies made about this, mummy-related movies, and all the kind of stuff you can imagine. Another level would be, Egypt itself, and of course there is no sense of pure Egypt, but there is a real nation, culture, Egyptian culture that we call Egypt, and so in a sense that's another level. And then a third level is what we're seeing now. Okay, so this is the level of Egypt in the popular imagination. And to go back to the point, as we look here at some relics from the Cairo Museum, to go back to my earlier point, what we see here is a need to reference all the other versions of Egypt that have come before, as these architects and designers were talking about at the TIA conference. So certainly it's not an easy task, and as you enter a theme land like this, maybe if you've never heard of the Luxor Las Vegas, but if you visited it once in your lifetime, there's going to be an association that is tipped off, right? There's going to be an association there because it's part of your consciousness, part of your imagination, so how could you not think about that particular association? So reflection certainly in what to me is a really impressive theme land here with all the variations, these 3 levels of Egyptian theming that are part of our consciousness. And as we think about these levels of theming, certainly I would say, as we look at here more of the theme land of ancient Egypt, that much of this consciousness is influenced by popular media. And of course, movies like The Mummy that you see represented here at Universal are very key and foundational in terms of creating many of those associations. And as I'll be showing you here in just a second with the second of the 2 rides that are featured in this land, there's this rather recognizable sound of the scarab beetles that can be heard in the Mummy movies. And so this, I think, was a key use of references of symbolism from one of the films, thus creating that very intense, vivid, and recognizable connection that most people who have seen the movies will have. So here's my reflection from that day. And you can see here, as we continue our focus on Egyptian theming, so I was hearing this sound, and to me it sounded like these scarab beetles in the Mummy ride. Indeed, that's what I was hearing. So it says something about the senses and familiar sounds and the sense of that intermedial aspect of how, actually the sound's becoming a little grating to me, but how movies inform our consciousness and how we can use some of those sensory details to also think about theme park rides. So more referencing here of the Mummy, of the ancient culture, of the archaeology as we look at Egyptian theming here at Universal Studios. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video feature today on Egyptomania. It's been quite thrilling for me, I have to say. I haven't been to Egypt, but I've been to some of the simulacra of Egypt, and certainly I found of them this to be the most impressive, as I focused on in this video feature. The rides are well themed, the 2 main rides, Mummy, the Revenge, and also the Archaeological Explorer ride, which is not as great, but certainly has some cool theming. The Oasis food hall is also very significantly themed, and throughout this theme land I think you get a pretty vivid sense of these different forms of the imagination that I've been talking about throughout this video feature. So please come back for additional video features focused here in Universal Singapore and in other spaces around the world.